The day the governor signed the bill was 7 months since Melody was born. And, it's just something I just felt compelled to do. And a week or so after we lost Melody, I went and met with Representative Anderson, and he was very sympathetic to my request, and was willing to look at it and willing to see what he could do. And I gave him information that I found out about other states. Here's what they've passed. We worked with the drafter to get the legislation the way we wanted it. I worked with the founder of the Miss Foundation, Dr. Cacciatore. I worked with Daryl Angulo, who helped pass it in Florida, which I believe was number 2, the second state to pass it. They warned me. They said, you're going to get people who will just try to shut this down and say, this isn't necessary. They will try to change the bill. They will do whatever they can to try and change it. It's okay. I'm ready for a fight. And so we got the bill drafted. And then Rich didn't want to initially file it because he wanted to have co-sponsors, which is fine. You can do it either way. And so he ended up with, I have to double check my numbers, I think there's like 23 or 5 co-sponsors in the House, which is House Bill 2195. And then Senator Butker ended up doing a companion bill in the Senate, Senate File 2176, so that the thought was if one house stalls for whatever reason, you've got a second bill coming. You can push it through the other chamber just in case. And so they got the co-sponsors on there. They got the bill filed, and then we went for the subcommittee meeting, or subcommittee hearing, and I get to the Capitol, and I had been a page back in 1995, so I was familiar with the legislative process and all these things. Never really done a subcommittee hearing, but I knew the basic process. And Representative Kaufman comes out and says, who wants to talk about this bill? So I went up there, and they were all sitting around a table in the House lounge, and people from Planned Parenthood were there, and Funeral Home Directors Association, and a couple other medical organizations and public health, and me. And they introduced themselves, and then Rich said, why don't you just go ahead and talk about the bill? And I had basically the letter to the editor that I had printed here. I had that plus some other information, and I was very shaky the first time I was doing this. But I went through, and literally the whole room sat spellbound, because I think they were just expecting a teary-eyed mom to come in there and say, please do this. But when they had questions, and they said, well, how does code define this? I had a copy of the code with me. I knew how they defined stillbirth. Well, they said, well, we can't, if we don't make a pronouncement of birth. I said, it doesn't matter. You make a pronouncement of live birth. Code defines live birth. Code defines stillbirth. There is no pronouncement of birth, period. It doesn't exist. What do other states say? Well, I had a copy of what the other states said. We had a woman on the subcommittee, Representative Westbrook Rochelle, who's very pro-choice, was concerned, for the slippery slope and for this idea that, we don't want to be infringing on that. Well, stillbirth isn't about choice. It's not about an option. None of these families have a choice in this matter. So we went, like I said, we went through the whole testimony, and initially, right, the day before that testimony, the public health had been asked, what their thoughts were, what they would like to see changed. And they basically tried to gut the whole bill. They wanted to call it a memorial certificate of stillbirth, and we want to do with this and everything. Well, what Iowa currently did before this bill is they would issue what's called a commemorative certificate of stillbirth. First of all, in my layman's understanding of code, they are not authorized to even do that. Code says you can issue commemorative certificates of birth and commemorative certificates of marriage. It's some fancy extra form you pay $35 for and whatever. Nothing about commemorative certificate of stillbirth. But they had pressure at one point to do that. They've only issued 5 in the last 11 years. Why? Because most people don't even know that exists unless you push for it. It's not on their website, it's not on anything. It's not signed by anybody other than IDPH staff, basically. So that was one issue. two, in our mind, a certificate of stillbirth is like giving a family a second death certificate. And they already have one of those. They already know their child died. What they want is an acknowledgement that says, we went through labor and delivery. We gave birth. And so the idea of what's called a certificate of birth resulting in stillbirth. And only 2 states, New York, which is number 32, which just passed, which just went into effect. The day of our Senate vote was the day their bill went into effect. It had like a 6-month waiting period or something from when it was signed last fall. And I think California, what theirs says is a certificate of stillbirth as 2 words. The families compromised and said, if that's what it takes to get this passed, because that's still a distinction that's saying they were still born. They were, these mothers still went through labor and delivery. Whereas if you just say certificate of stillbirth as 1 word, you're not acknowledging the actual birth. You're acknowledging a child was born dead, but you're not acknowledging the child was actually born. And so we ended up, and I had copies of West Virginia last year had a similar bill. They tried to tack on all sorts of things about an aborted fetus should get a certificate of birth resulting in stillbirth, all this stuff, and the Miss Foundation said, wait a minute. We will not stand by this bill. We do not support this bill. Go back to the original language. This is not what this is about. Because there are a lot of people who are very pro-choice who are for a certificate of birth resulting in stillbirth. We were able to pass out of committee without changes. I went back out of subcommittee without changes. We went before Judiciary, and they passed it out of House Judiciary with no changes. All of them voted for it. And I thought I would have to testify again, but it was funnel week, so it was really, unless there was something controversial or something major, they don't mess with extra debate, they just move it forward. On the day that it was passed out of House Judiciary, I met with the bill chairman for the Senate, which is Senator Bolcom. I had to wait like 40 minutes to get out of the meeting, and it's a hurry up and wait is what government is. But I said, well, when are you going to have a subcommittee meeting? And he had not been an original co-signer. It was going to go through HR. He was assigned to the bill. Well, I'm not planning on having a subcommittee meeting. Really? Because it pretty much kills the bill. You can't get it out of subcommittee, you're not going to go anywhere with it. But he said, if you can get it out of the House clean, I will help push it through in the Senate. So, I said, okay. I wasn't happy with that, but there wasn't anything I could do, and knowing we had already passed out of House Judiciary, helped quite a bit. Once we passed out of Judiciary, I think it was before the House vote. Steve Dace's, Rebecca Maxwell, they printed my article, or what I had written, and it turned out that Tom Yoakum, who was a lobbyist up in Des Moines, who was a former legislator for like 20-some years, and he, takes on these cases for the Native Americans and all sorts of different groups who are mostly, the silent minority, and he gives them a voice. And he had posted something about, what can I do to help? I'm a very liberal Democrat, but I believe in this. This is a nonpartisan issue. What can I do to help? And so we chatted back and forth a little bit, and I hadn't caught that the bill got a new number. Once the bill passes out of committee, it's assigned a whole new number because now it's passed out of committee. And so he came on board with us, and free of charge, just volunteered, wanted to help. And we ended up, I went up for the House vote, and it passed out of the House 98-0. And to watch, I was able to sit next to Representative Kaufman, and he said a few words, and Representative Westerfeld said a few words. Anderson didn't say a whole lot, but that was also the day Clarinda won their first state basketball game ever. So it was sort of a historic day on 2 fronts, which we were waiting for Anderson to come back from the ball game and do the vote on the bill. But anyway, to watch that, to be able to sit there and watch them all vote for it. Ones who I knew were very, very pro-choice, who, but they could understand, they got it. They got that this isn't about choice, this is about grieving families. And when you can understand that, honestly, it's a no-brainer. It really is. And So we got out of the house before the funnel, we got passed out of committee before funnel week, we passed out of the house before the end of that deadline, and then we go over to, the bill goes over to the Senate. And at first, Volcom was, not wanting to do a committee meeting, and then I'd been told the day before, oh, it sounds like they're all going to be for it, shouldn't be a big deal, you probably don't even have to come up to testify. Yeah, I'm going to be there anyway, just in case, because that's the way I am. And what had happened the night before is that Tom had happened to catch Senator Volcom, and Volcom wasn't real sure this was going to go anywhere, and well, we can't, why would we can't do something every time somebody comes crying to us that there's an issue that needs to be resolved. I mean, he apparently is single, doesn't have any kids, never been through this, and I think the Planned Parenthood lobby was getting a little antsy because they were not expecting, I don't think, this to move as fast and as Jen Ford as it did. We did have one amendment change at the House vote, and it was just some slight language things to make IDPH happy in how it gets processed. So it wasn't anything major, it was just a slight minor wording change. But anyway, so Tom was like, you need to be sure and be here because they're going to, try to run an amendment. We weren't going to pre-file it, which meant I could not see the amendment before we went to committee, all this stuff. Well, Tom was able to get Majority Leader Gronsall to meet with the subcommittee before the subcommittee meeting and, basically said this is a nonpartisan issue. I don't know what was said in the meeting. I wasn't at the meeting. I just know that meeting happened. And so we went in for the subcommittee hearing, and there was another dad who was there. They lost their son about 4 years ago in the Planned Parenthood, and apparently my lobbyist made their lobbyists cry a few days prior to this because their amendment that they wanted to run was going back to the original language that would have gutted the bill. Again, not what we want. And so I read through my testimony again, and again, if they had questions, I had the information there, and the lady from IDPH was there, and he said, well, it's going to look like this certificate. She held up a certificate of what's called certificate of live birth, which is what it's a birth certificate in Iowa. And so we had this whole discussion, and there was, IDPH, they were fine with the language. Well, the guy from Planned Parenthood, we still don't like this language. It gives us heartburn. We don't, we still think it's problems down the road. The guy basically from Planned Parenthood was like, well, we still have heartburn over this language. And I kept thinking later, my grief and the grief of all these other families trumps your heartburn every day of the week. Every day of the week.